What was life like in the Old West? Well, if you ask a few select Japanese cowboys, it was pretty sweet. Actually, I'm not even gonna lie to you, there are specific Japanese who look at the cowboy era in Old West out here, kind of like American weebs look at the samurai era of Japan. Absolutely bizarre, but I suppose you could just call it like a level of cultural appreciation. Anyhow, the Old West was bloody, hot, boring, everyone was mostly a little dehydrated and a little drunk, and John Marston was just yelling chicken jockey at a woman yelling at everybody at the theater. It was a very different time, and difficult time for anyone attempting to settle out west. Getting there would always drop half your group of dysentery usually, because as a youngling, I never made it through the Oregon Trail at all. But arguably, what could make it even worse were all the leftover relics of a different time. All throughout human history, there has been more friendly groups of people and less friendly groups of people, and maybe possibly a little more bitey. Like that dude in your class in second grade who always bit people, you just kind of learn to avoid them. However, it's a bit more difficult when they come directly at you, and at that point, you just gotta kind of defend yourself. But this brings us around perfectly to today's episode. This relic group engages in some extremely hostile practices, but the question is why exactly, and biologically, why is this seen as such a crackhead practice? Well, let's discuss that in today's episode, covering Bone Tomahawk. We kick off today's story with 30,348,387 production companies as a man lays on the ground, another man jumps on him and starts cutting his neck. Ouchies. Everyone appears to have been taken out as they slept, so very little fight was put up. As they talk and then raid through their stuff, one guy is still up as then he gets shot and then gets a rock to the head. Absolutely brutal. They begin talking about major veins of the neck, which, wait a minute, is that the clown from the Devil's Rejects, Captain Spaulding? Ha! And you have Officer Doofy from Scary Movie. Man, what a duo we got here. So Captain Spaulding gets upset at Criminal Doofy for not severing all 16 major veins of the neck, which led them to almost dealing with a counterattack. Looking out, they then hear the horses approaching as they go to the rocks to hide. Scurrying along, as they put it, they then hear a horn being blown, but choose to completely ignore it. They discuss how it's ominous. More than you know, brother. Actually, you know what? You're not my brother. You're a coward, and thieves disgust me. Which, fun fact, I wrote a book one time. I think it was about like 283 pages, if I remember correctly. Anyways, I was working on the sequel when I took this girl out on a date, and she didn't lock her side of the car. It was a 1998 Chevy Cavalier, so not exactly having all the bells and whistles, but it had tires and it rolled. Guy broke into my car and stole my laptop. I remember literally seeing him as he scoped out my car, but I didn't know what he was doing, and then he saw me in the car, so he walked off. To my credit, I told her to lock her side of the car. We did not continue dating after that. Anyways, hence the ire for thieves. Lost that book and the sequel. Absolutely brutal. Moving on. Finding bear skulls, they then think it's a warning as there are human skulls, but they don't end up seeing those. They talk about how they're going through the burial ground as civilized man doesn't have to worry about this, which, y'all, civilized? After robbing people? No shot. That's just basic caveman nonsense. And you're a caveman. So hearing another horn, Captain Spaulding then catches an arrow in one of his 16 major veins of his neck as Officer Doofy then runs off, leaving him behind. A man then runs up and takes him out as we flash forward to, I think, 11 days later. I may have misread earlier because I wrote earlier for some reason. Anyways, welcome to Bright Hope. The Conjuring has his leg broke, which means he won't be doing anything. Also, do you remember The Conjuring 2? If that wasn't a ripoff of the Babadook, I don't know what was. So The Conjuring, with his leg broken, appears to basically going to be put up for about 12 weeks as a woman comes in asking if he does intend to sulk for those 12 weeks while his leg heals. It's his wife. She then talks about how he's there with her, and then he tells her, well, you're prettier than most cows. And this guy really does have a way with words. Criminal Doofy is now out in the woods burying something as over at the saloon, it's a fairly quiet night. All beige everything then comes in next, asking for a drink. Going to the piano man, his prices are a little messed up, and he requires a drink to actually start playing the piano. Jumping over to the sheriff's, McCready is making some horrific smelling soup, as a man then runs in telling him he sucks at cooking. Asking for some soup, talk about biting the hand that feeds, giving him some, he says he hasn't eaten in days. The deputy then reports he was out there to put flowers on Nadine's grave, and he claims he saw a man on the perimeter of town that he doesn't recognize. He then reports he changed his clothes and then threw his luggage in a hole and covered it up. So, fairly sus. He's over at the Learned Goat right now as McCready and the deputy then head out to go confront him. Meanwhile, over at The Conjuring, he's hooking up with his wife, which I don't believe is the terminology when you're married, as then we jump back over to Officer Doofy at the saloon, which Criminal Doofy is his real name. McCready then comes in to talk to Criminal Doofy, and he says he didn't do anything wrong, which McCready's like, I didn't really ask you that. So famously, that's a great thing to say in response. Given the very easy extrapolation here, McCready then asks why he was there and what he stole from somebody to get these clothes. The deputy then searches him, asking if he buried his things in a hole, as then he tries to make a run for it, but takes some lead as a result. Back over at The Conjuring, 4 minutes and 38 seconds later, Samantha tends to his leg, as she asks him to read his poem out loud. It's already already 10:30 and someone is now at the door. I wouldn't have heard them as I would already be asleep. All beige everything. Actually, you know what? I wrote this in the script as all beige everything. That's a really long name. I'm gonna go with Abe. Has arrived to ask if Samantha will come down and pull a bullet out of this drifter's leg. Condrey then tells Abe not to flirt with his wife or there will be consequences, as over at McCready's, they then play checkers. It's a bit of a slow start, I know, but before you know it, it'll all be people getting chopped in half and bone tomahawks to the dome. Looking through the criminal doofy's things, they then find a blonde hair, decidedly probably not his. Samantha then arrives to pull the bullet as she heads into his cell. Doofy is sporting a fever, which is a bit strange given the bullet situation just happened. She will need to monitor Doofy's fever levels after then she finishes up with this. Most everyone leaves except for Nick to keep an eye on Doofy. McCready then heads over to the Conjurings to tell him where his wife is and why it's happening, as then he leaves out. Conjuring then grabs a letter, reads it out loud for the audience. The shapes of the hills remind him of his wife. Don't ask what shapes those are, as he realizes this isn't a poem at all, so he has no idea what his wife was talking about, as then he puts up the letter. Over at a totally sterilized and in no way gangrenous assisting environment, Doofy then wakes up saying his body feels like cotton. She gave him some opium, which, I mean, this guy's already a criminal. Welcome to your new life here, brother. You will be fiending for this from here on out. Samantha then wraps up her work as wolves start being heard around town. Over in another part of town, a young man then walks out with a lantern, hearing the horses horsing around, as then he tells them he's coming and not to fret. Calling out to another man within the barn, the horns keep blowing the distance. Oh, God! Prometheus just gets an arrow straight through the head. Ouchies. Probably not. Doubt the brain would really have any actual time to process that. Plus, I mean, there's really no pain receptors in the brain itself, given that that's the thing interpreting the pain. Migraines are hilarious based on that knowledge. Meanwhile, Conrad then wakes up asking if Samantha's back yet, as he calls out to her the next morning. Over at McCready's, he kisses his wife, who definitely has pneumonia, as the bartender then comes running in saying there's a bit of a situation from last night. The Arrowhead man from last night was torn up, as the posse is rounded up to go check out the barn. Calling out into it, McCready then enters the barn and finds the man from last night, which he's just tore up. All the horses have been stolen, as then they head to the sheriff's building, finding an arrow in one of the posts. Doofy is gone, and so is Samantha. McCready doesn't recognize the arrow, as he finds Samantha's bag. McCready now needs to go talk to the Conjuring, which is going to be a super awkward conversation because he brought her into this whole situation. Heading over to the Conjurings, McCready says Samantha was abducted by some locals. Closing the Conjuring's door, he then walks to the Learned Goat as they enter the saloon. Getting a posse together, the native then comes in saying this particular tribe does not have a name because they really don't have a language at all. And evidently his tribe is not very friendly to them, and he won't take them to them either. Mr. Helpful over here, I suppose, but he says the group is a bunch of inbreds who eat their own mothers. Alright, I'm detecting some strong feelings here. He continues on, if they bring him a map though, of the western range, he will show them where they are, but he's not going out there. McCready then reports that these are Troglodytes that took them out. He doesn't want to call them human based on the natives' language about them, but the native says he doesn't think they have a chance against any of them. It doesn't matter how many there are. Thanks for that vote of confidence there, Prometheus. Abe then says he will go with them as he got Samantha involved. It seems unselfish now. He has the hots for Samantha. McCready doesn't address the mayor for some reason, as then everyone locks and loads Brides of Christ and gets ready to head out in 15 minutes. Conjuring grabs his letter as McCready then cuts up some food for the trip, as his wife tries to dissuade him from leaving, but he heads out anyways. Man, the whole sheriff's duties has its limits speech did not work. Bit of advice for you, it's not supposed to. It's kind of like there's this concept that, amongst men and women and all this stuff where it's like, essentially, you gotta just go do the thing. Right? I'm not telling you how to live your life, but if you're dissuaded, it's sort of like if you were drafted, right? And, everybody's gonna cry, don't leave. You need to leave. Trust me. Go against that instinct. Anyway, so Deputy goes and puts flowers on Nadine's graves, which, dang, she dropped at 48. That's a rough life, as everyone then meets up at the sheriff's. And as McCready basically tells the Conjuring, they need to be smart. It's a 5-day ride, and they're making it in 3. If the horses drop, they aren't rescuing anyone. The only advantage they have is being smarter and probably not inbred. Jury's a bit out on that one. Not a lot of people out west, so running into your cousin that you didn't know about was an absolute real threat. So starting their ride out, they then leave Bright Hope. Sometime later, they stop to rest before setting off once more. Abe has a beige horse too. This guy really enjoys the color beige. Or is it cream colored? I don't know. It looks beige to me. So setting up the shop for the night, Abe then sets a perimeter with bells. If they hear a noise, they need to draw and shoot. Stay strapped or get clapped. Abe says he's the most intelligent in there, and he intends to keep them all alive. I.S. Bit of a vain one, this guy. I know him well. Because, why, he's me. If the Michigan Dogman exists, I'm 100% getting taken out by that thing in June 2027. And if you weren't aware, go subscribe to my Roanoke Tales channel. I said if I'd hit 1 million, I'd go hunt the Michigan Dogman. I lied. I'm just going to do it anyways, just for the love of the game, and go hunt that thing down. I've actually taken up running as of late to increase the overall conditioning levels so I can try to outrun that thing when inevitably I'm like, oh my god, it's real.
If it bleeds, we can kill it.
So back at Team Alpha here, Deputy then jokes about how no woman wants Abe, which is why he never got married, and then they just all eat that night. And there's some pretty harsh words, but they pray before they eat the soup based, as then McCready was the creator of this soup, good luck guys, as they ask when they should actually leave. He says, well, I only get about 4 hours sleep a night, so we should just leave then. Man, that is terrible for, like, not getting cancer. The deputy then asks McCready if he can actually read a book in the bath, because when he tries to read a book in the bath, it always gets the book wet. Alright then, man, so they discuss how they should read it, or at least he should read it without the book getting wet. I do believe the deputy here has, like, dementia or something, so as they all go quiet to actually go to sleep, they then hear a line get tripped as Abe wakes up and immediately pops it. It appears to have been a coyote of some sort. So stopping off at a creek the next morning, they load up on some dysentery water, as the deputy says the Conjuring's behavior is a little sus. How exactly? So Abe looks out as he sees a snake in a tree, and then the Conjuring pops the snake, and sitting down he goes to pull off his boot, which is rather painful, as this wound is most definitely infected, pouring alcohol on it. Yeah, that infection runs a little deeper than that, brother. McCready then goes over to talk to him about said leg, as the Conjuring is very clearly injured. McCready asks if he's holding any of the painkiller, and to hand it over so he doesn't fall off his horse. Yielding it, the deputy then tends to the Conjuring's leg as they talk about if it's going gangrenous or not, which is a very rough way to go. Ugh. So later that night, as they set up camp, hearing a twig snap, a man appears in the dark named Ramiro. They tell him to light a match or they will light it up with their handhelds. He claims to have an associate with them that was just also about to announce himself, but for some reason didn't. They tell the other men to strike a match, and as they toss over their handhelds, Abe just lights them up. They then draw on Abe as he tells them to holster their handhelds, lighting them up as he believes they were basically a scouting party. Abe says they need to pack up the camp and make a cold camp somewhere more defensible. Conjure then asks what happened, as then they get ready to go. He slept through all of that because his infection is bad. Also, pretty messed up, but you gotta figure, why would you not call out to a group from further away if you knew they were there? Sure, they could have thought maybe you were like, oh, well, these are bandits too. But then in reality, why would you walk up on them? Don't walk up on any group just hanging out in the West back in the day. Important information if we ever colonize Mars. So the deputy then heads over to the men as he reports they were sort of armed, as then they load up and then head out. Abe says he sees a spot shielded on one side, so no one could actually walk up on them. The deputy says he shouldn't have taken them out, as one of them was wearing a crucifix. Of course, the question is, why approach a camp in the middle of the night at all that close? Clearly, you were sneaking around if you accidentally stepped on that twig, because that's how they heard you. Just saying. Reading the context clues here, they were definitely going to attack you, crucifix or not. Waking up later to an attack, Conjure then takes out the guy that was going after Abe. They then look out at Abe's horse because she resisted going with the horse bandits, as then he walks over. I guess they shot the horse first, so then they put the horse, or he puts the horse out of its misery. So now they need to head out, as the Conjuring says if he falls asleep, he will catch up later. They need to get out of there regardless. They let the Conjuring go with them, or go without them, saying they will carry his stuff as he begins his walk towards the group of cannibals. As he keeps going, day is broken, and this has to be massively painful on that leg. McCready, at this point, then calls out to him asking if he is well, because they have caught up with him, as he says, yes, but actually, no. Walking with them a bit more, he won't be able to keep up this pace at all. The group then walks on ahead, leaving him behind as he's on his own for the duration of this journey to the next camp. Calling out to everyone as he has finally arrived at camp, they say that they are leaving at twilight. Laying down, they all pass out as twilight hits quick, and then it's time to go. Putting back on his boots, Conjuring gets up as Abe says, if he gets there first, don't worry, I won't flirt with your wife, which Conjuring then punches him but falls and a snap can be heard. Abe reports he made a pass years ago at Samantha and she refused him, so he's entitled to the occasional innuendo since he's out there helping save her. Well, yes, but actually no. Are you sure you're just not here in hopes of an injured man succumbing to his injuries and you look like the hero arriving to save her? Because that's what it really looks like. Something about if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off, which will become wildly important later. So Conjuring then crashes out about how those cannibals have her and they could be doing God knows what with her right now, as then they check his leg. The deputy starts looking at his leg and finds it looks pretty bad. McCready tells him he's staying behind and then he yells at McCready about how Samantha is involved as Conjuring sits up and then also kind of takes a gander at this limb. Looks pretty bad. Conjuring says this is his choice to keep going, not McCready's. He then asks the deputy to set the bone as McCready says he will mark the route for when he wakes up. Conjuring apologizes to McCready as he asks him to keep his wife safe and also sorry for that crash out. He starts then feeling the medicine, Mr. Krabs, as he leans back. Embracing him, they pop his bone back into place, which the pain then knocks him out. So, leaving him behind, McCready asks if he will survive, as the deputy says, well, he has a chance. Walking into the night, he has a chance as long as a coyote doesn't find him. Because it's game over, man. So walking into the night, they then begin hearing the horns blow as Abe reports he heard that back in Bright Hope. McCready then says to pull their arms as they have been spotted. Sounds further away now as McCready then says no way they are frightened of them. Abe then reports he didn't take out enough people. They then question why Abe hates Native Americans so much, as apparently his mother and sister were, I think, completely just annihilated in front of him. It may have marginally affected his ability to get along with people. So the deputy then keeps talking as McCready basically tells him to shut his aperture. Approaching some uneven terrain in the Valley of Starving Men, Abe then says he sees several. The deputy looks out as he says he can see a few people as well, and handing it off to McCready, he then closes up the spotter as Abe gets ready to head down, given he's the most experienced, taking point. Finding horse tracks, McCready then lines up some rocks as the tracks go west. Finding the bear skulls, they then hear the horns start blowing, and then heading into the brush, great ambush spot. Just saying. Abe then heads through as he returns back, saying he will signal once he makes a determination. Grabbing a rock? Apparently that's the signal. Heading in, they then watch as they continue hearing wolves howl. McCready then looks at his watch as a rock is thrown back. Heading through next, Abe then points up at the cave entrance as an attack is launched. McCready gets a rock thrown in his hand as then they drop a few of the attackers, as Abe appears to get arrowed in the forearm, I guess? Well, as it turns out, I'm completely wrong about that assumption. We'll see in a second, but in the chaos, McCready then drops another one. Abe then tells him to tie off his forearm, as McCready took an arrow to the arm. Abe says he's too vain to live as a cripple. Good lord. The deputy is then partially scalped, painful. He's going to make his stand there, as evidently his whole hand is gone. Ouchies. Smoking a cigar, he then grabs his repeater as he looks at his attacker pushing on his side. He releases that noise from the neck as another then runs around and tries to Bone Tomahawk Abe as then a shot is fired. McCready and the deputy are all that's, functional in this rescue team, as they then round a corner and the deputy is immediately shot in the arm as a cannibal then starts choking out McCready. They put a stick in his mouth and then knock him unconscious, and then the deputy also is knocked out as they drag them to the cave system. The deputy wakes up as he sees Abe was bone tomahawked in the head, so yeah, he's not coming back. Calling out to the cave, a rope is then dropped as they are brought up. Being taken to a holding area, Samantha then tells them to go into the cell for their own good, as McCready asks if Samantha's hurt, as the Nick guy is not doing too well, and they already ate Doofy. I wonder if he tasted funny. One of the cannibals then comes in and calls out as they drag Nick into the area. Stripping him, McCready and the deputy then try to break out as they smack McCready's fingers, allegedly breaking them, as Nick informs McCready about what Doofy had done. He tells McCready to send his possessions back to his brother in Michigan, as then they scalp him and shove it into his mouth. Bro, that's just crazy aggressive for the sake of being aggressive. They then turn him upside down as McCready starts telling him the cavalry is already coming, they already know they're here, and he will be avenged. They then start splitting him from the pelvis as they pull him apart. Well, I can't show any of this. But Nick is now gone, good lord. That is like the most painful way to go out. Your brain has blood the entire time. God! Alright, so the deputy then asks what McCready said and if it was true, but McCready was lying to Nick about the cavalry coming, as he says that's what he would want. He's like, I would want to be avenged, and considering I'm about to be split in half, I figured he would probably want to hear at least he was going to be avenged in the same situation. Samantha then asks about the conjuring, as they say, well, they left him behind, as she calls them idiots for it. McCready says he told him not to follow them, but he wouldn't be dissuaded. McCready then asks how many of them there actually are, as Samantha cries, and she says, well, I think there's 12 males and 2 females, but the women are blinded and crippled by the men. McCready has a plan, though. He wants to poison them. Waking up, conjuring is back in action. It's like being the last Helldiver with literally no stems, 25% health, and no reinforcements. If you pull it off, then you truly are the John Helldiver. So he immediately falls and brings his health down to 10%. Happens to the best of us. And taking a shot of the medicine, he walks back through the night and into the next morning before falling asleep on his crutch. Hearing the calls, he then yells at God about getting help, and this is what he's been asking for his entire life, so maybe he could lend a hand this time around, as then he crawls on, following the rocks. Approaching the Valley of Starving Men, he's out of water as he leans against a ledge and then falls asleep. Back in the cave, the deputy says he wants a drink, as the cannibal, they make a big deal out of oh, give me some of that, yeah, it's great. As the cannibal then takes it and then knocks back the drink before handing it to the others. Drinking it all, they then wander off, as Samantha says one will fall asleep, the second dies, and the third didn't get enough to be affected. So there should be still seven of them, I suppose, to deal with. 7-ish. Meanwhile, the cannibals have found Broham as he takes out one before having to reload on the second, but he's able to drop him as well. Looking at him, he's got something in his throat, so he cuts it out and puts it in his pocket for later, as a souvenir, and then starts heading towards the valley. Well, I think there's 4 down now, so maybe 5 with the other guy, 6 temporarily left. So probably 6 left, I think. Of course, they said 7. Anyways, it doesn't matter. He then finds everyone's stuff as he crawls and blows in the whistle as one runs around the corner and then he drops him. Calling out to the others, another rounds the corner as he's taken out next, so 4 left who are still actionable. It's all theory and politics on the amount though, so they've been pretty vague. McCready then calls out to Samantha, saying she needs to try to eat at least something, as the deputy then starts talking about the flea circus that came to Bright Hope, and Samantha's like, well, no, the duo, they were called the Sanderson, and the deputy thought it was real, but his wife thought it was fake. Deputy out here wilding, as Samantha then tells him, well, most flea circuses use tricks, but this one was real. They had talent. Okay. So hearing another screech, the cannibals then drag in one of their own, and they're a little upset about it because he's not waking up. McCready then launches the attack first as they go after the sheriff, cutting his side. Sticking the flask in his open wound from the fire, geez, man, grabbing the handheld, they go to pop him in the crotch as a call rings out. One goes to investigate as the sheriff is then shot in the stomach finally because the cannibal has figured out how to operate a repeater. Grabbing the Bone Tomahawk, he then cuts off part of the cannibal's foot and then smashes him in the head with it, which is what he deserves. McCready then asks how many he got out there as he reports 3. McCready reports, I don't think I'm going to be making it. And they're like, are you sure? He's like, I'm positive. He's not looking good. He tells the deputy to escort them home as he will stay and take out the remaining males since they know where Bright Hope actually is. Handing him the repeater, he has a chance to avenge himself and also Nick. Nobody's avenging Doofy. McCready then tells the deputy to say goodbye to his wife for him and he will say hello to his. Beginning their exit out of the cave, he then finds some of the women are pregnant with no eyes, no limbs. They're just sort of hanging out being baby factories. That's a sucky life. But these guys have gotten to be majorly inbred because there's only 2 women. Calling out to anyone in the area with a throat whistle, the deputy then grabs a rock as they start walking back towards Bright Hope. Conjuring keeps tripping hardcore, because of the bones in his leg being broken, and his wife says, well, I want a proper kiss, but that whistle is gross. Hearing shots in the distance, 3 have rung out, ending the entire cannibal tribe. And thus concludes Bone Tomahawk. Are you secretly a cannibal?
You got me.
If that question worries you, then maybe you crave the human meat. I don't know. I mean, it's pretty early. I haven't had coffee yet, so I don't even know what I'm on about right now. But the reality is there are 2 simultaneous things going on within your head when you look at human meat. The initial response and the survival response. Clearly, the survival response is there for dire situations. Typically, it just doesn't show up for funsies because your blood sugar gets a little low. You're not the citizens of South Park eating the camera crew every few hours because you're trapped in the community center. And there's a good reason for this. So let's start at the most basic component that allows humanity to actually live together rather than seeing each other as, meals. First off, we are top tier predators, apex, some would call us, because humanity is number 1. The brain gambit, rather than the tried and true claw and muscle build, was truly one of the most Hail Mary passes that nature would ever throw, but it turned out to be insanely good. Our brains and builds do 2 things. First, our builds make us sort of a jack of all trades. We're able to grasp and sort of build things with our hands. We have a marginal amount of defensive capabilities. I mean, there is a story about a dad absolutely bashing in the face of a bear with a piece of firewood after it went after his son, but mostly with just our builds, lack of claws, and general frailty, while we can build things and create and do all this and XYZ, when it comes to defense, we unfortunately lack with what we do have. I mean, our fingernails are not exactly claws, and a gorilla can bench press 2,000 pounds, and we typically can't. I don't think anybody has, actually. And that's where our brains come into play. Our brains are actually somewhat insane. Now, if you've watched this channel for long enough, you probably expect me to go down the path of abstract thinking about neurological connections made within. But actually, to this end, it doesn't really relate, so we probably won't. Got him! Our brains actually do some fairly interesting things, and this allows us to invent or bolster our regular abilities and our moderate builds, I guess you could say. I remember talking about how humanity actually can outclass any animal, and someone's like, oh yeah, well if humanity's apex, because he was trying to argue that we weren't apex predators, then put them up against a bear with what nature gave them and see who wins. And it's like, okay then, cringe lord, well our brains exist, and I can conceptualize a spear and it being sharpened and traps being set, and that is what nature gave me the ability to do. So given enough prep time, I can also conceptualize how to build a force multiplier, or possibly even a crossbow. So humanity still comes out on top, even with what nature gave us. But our brains do more than just cover our shortcomings of our own physical biology. When we were getting picked up by giant birds back in the day, and also by saber-tooths and short-faced bears, which even to that end, we definitely still had more dubs than L's on that one, the reality would set in that our species was A, meant for greatness, 2, more capable than the creatures around us, and D, worked better together. The last one being the most important aspect. When you take a hyper-intelligent creature with the capability for violence that we have and put them together in a group, there needs to be counterbalances in the neurological centers of this particular species so that we can work together. And there have been varying ranges in which our ancestors also accomplished this. Taking the Neanderthal, for instance, they stuck with kind of smaller groups, usually their own family members or possibly close relatives nearby, maybe even just like really, really close friends. But this worked for them for quite some time until Homo sapiens showed up, because when that interaction went down, Neanderthal would be bred out of existence by simply hooking up with humans. And I'm not sure which direction it really went, but humans have always liked novelty, whether it be male or female. So I'm gonna go ahead and say, if you were a built enough male Neanderthal, you were probably pulling some Homo sapien females, and I guarantee you, a guy who is having no luck with the tribe as far as Homo sapiens were concerned would eventually be like, well, I mean, I suppose in the light of the cave, she is pretty hot, and then went after a female Neanderthal. Now, the real question is, did his boys clown him later? Yes. So when you look at Homo sapiens in particular, the level of social ability that we have isn't just because we decided to start working together and everything was cool. It started long before that, according to the theory of evolution, back when we were hairier, and our brains would be intrinsically changed over time and molded by this experience to actually form deep bonds. And this is why I maintain it's always, there's always someone in the comments who's going to be a contrarian about this and say, well, actually, I don't need other people. No person is an island. In fact, separating yourself intentionally or even not intentionally because you don't wear deodorant from a collective group has physical impacts on your health beyond just a feeling of loneliness. In that depressive state with no social stimulation, your immune system can actually tank, and that's not good because you'll get sick, and also cancer rates can rise. Appetite can either disappear or rise, leading to malnutrition or obesity in some cases, and life will appear more gray overall. Muscle mass begins to decline, which is even worse because then you're not pulling anybody, and bones become more brittle. So then you break your leg and then you're inside anyways. So these are like more symptomatic of the disease, from like a standpoint of like if you have friends, maybe you want to come out exposing you to like more diseases, necessitating the immune system to be top tier, and they may go to the gym or grab some food. But the biggest thing is going to be depression formation, which is going to impact how the brain fires and what messages are pushed more clearly and which ones are not. To this end, groups would form, which means protection, interaction, less strain on resource acquisition, reproduction, and increased quality of life for members of the tribe that properly integrate. And this is why thieves can face the wall 10 out of 10 times, because they essentially steal from the group, even though they're trying to integrate into said group. I think I've stolen a Snickers bar before in my life when I was like 14 by accident, so I gotta take my L as well. I would be facing the wall with them, but hey, that's the price you pay when you start rendering ultimatums like this.
Get your hand off my...
Anyhow, being in those groups, generation after generation, this would begin to alter the very structuring of the brains of humans until you have what we are now, a hypersocial, hyper-intelligent species with a hyper amount of anxiety that dominates the entire planet with interconnected webs of trade, travel, and some other T thing that I can't think of right now. And all of this is to say, that's what makes cannibalism so bad. Your brain absolutely detests it. Probably because you have a functional brain. Probably. Then again, I don't know you. Of course, you are understanding the words that I'm saying right now, so let's assume you have a functional brain and you can weigh the pros and cons. On the one hand, you have a friend, lover, life partner, someone to help you hunt, someone to hunt for you, someone to interact with, someone to farm with, someone to get you through difficulties that will inevitably arrive in your life, family, friends, even enemies that you can talk about because it's fun to also talk about your enemies to people you like. All of these people come with socializing in a group. So let's label those as pros. Versus the cons. You're made of meat and you eat meat, right? That means you're susceptible. So a brain looks at these comparisons and immediately chooses the former over the latter, and for good reason. At the end of the day, we are all just mammalian flesh and bone, right? But our brains, which are healthy, allegedly, will assign meaning to that flesh and blood that stands before you. Woven within their existence is the understanding that they exist, and so do we. And as an individual, we would like to not be eaten either. So clearly, you don't want to eat others. It's not even something you really should have to think about at the end of the day, because a healthy brain looks at eating a person in a similar manner to licking the inside of a public toilet bowl from a Love's gas station. You're not going to do it. Hopefully, you're not going to do it. Yeah, you have free will, and maybe you would, but most people, it's not even a possibility to them. That's what makes the brain interesting. It's an understanding of free will and its limitations. But let me ask you an important question. Gun to your head, would your brain allow you to do the aforementioned action if your life depended on it? Very likely the answer is yes. Absolutely gross, bro. The brain's response to seeing cannibalism, whether depicted in movies or in real life, runs in very specific areas known as the disgust circuit, which is the same circuit that's activated if you're licking toilet bowls. Even when it comes to the concept, it still fires these areas of the brain. So let's run down those real quick and learn about the areas that are there to tell you, hey bro, go eat a sandwich, not your friend's leg. The first area to light up initially would be the prefrontal cortex. This is typically going to start firing anyways as you're navigating a social situation, and it's actively engaged in decision making. So it's saying not eat somebody, which is an active choice. Seeing someone eat someone else, you see it is a choice, but your brain is going, hey yo, what? In response, and then preventing you from doing the same thing, at least for a time. Another area is going to be just behind the prefrontal cortex, known as the anterior cingulate cortex, and actually anxiety is typically controlled within this area of the brain, helping to moderate the amygdala's response. When it gets the hint that you're eating people or somebody else is eating people, it will fire, and more so, if you knew the person, emotional pain will build. However, if the choice of cannibalism is presented to you, it instead will weigh the inevitable conflict within yourself. At first, it wins usually. However, the hungrier you get, the quieter it will become, which we'll talk about that here in a moment. The next area is going to be the amygdala, which once this area realizes the other person is a person too, and they are being eaten, it will say, you know what, I too am made of a person, which means these guys are willing to eat people, which means I could be eaten in this situation. At this point, fear will begin to rise along with adrenaline and cortisol, preparing you to basically fight like hell should they come after you. What is it? Two monkeys are entering the ark and you're the third monkey, and brother, it's starting to rain. If ever you're in a cannibalized situation, you gotta adopt the mindset, take as many with them as possible with you. Like, that's the best way to do it. I mean, it's not gonna be a good situation. If there's like 40 of them and one of you, you're screwed. But you know what? You can take a few eyeballs, rip off some jaws, do anything that you could possibly do. Inflict as much damage on the way out. I mean, why not, you know? So to those with normal brains, though, the insula will actually get involved, which is one of the most important aspects of the brain in this situation, and this is what's responsible for disgust. Disgust is rather interesting as a concept in the brain itself. There are physical reasons for its activation and also emotional reasons. Physically, let's say like in food situations, right? Disgust will arise because there's something dangerous about the food that you could be eating. Does it look right? Does it smell weird? Did you see Uga eat it that one time and then he threw up so much he died? Disgust to this end is quite important, but funnily enough, disgust also can be turned off sometimes very intentionally by the brain. Now, for all my audience who are a bit older and more experienced, will say, maybe you've noticed in your own behavior, you're willing to do things in the name of procreation that after the fact you'll question your life choices. The reason is your brain actively turns off the disgust factor when you hook up with someone else. And this is why when you view internet stuff, there's like a well-known meme of like, once you've completed the action, you'll be like, oh my God. Yeah, that was your brain turning off disgust to engage in whatever action that was. It's pretty odd, but why does it do this? You might be asking, like, why am I able to just completely override my rational brain in that moment? Because you know what, sometimes it's 2 a.m. and you've gone home with somebody at the bar that you wake up the next morning, you're like, oh no. Well, this is because we haven't always had baths and hygienic practices available to us like we have now. And we all know what we're doing at 9 a.m. People were blowing backs out in caves after hunting all day past 9 a.m. And this, creates a situation. So let's just say then disgust had to be toned down for the propagation of our species because the sense of smell exists and also eyesight. But the takeaway here is that the brain can actively shut off disgust should the need arise, and it does it quite frequently depending on your level of success with others and what you're doing, again at 3 a.m. at the bar. So now, why then, if the brain can shut off disgust, does cannibalism even exist in the first place? Because that means it's an active process. Well, the insula will actually light up in disgust for quite a few things. Things like rotting meat is a big one because it can in turn make you quite sick if you eat that. Bodily fluids, because disease, whether it was known back in the day or not, our brains knew it could be dangerous. The smell of disease and decay Because again, we didn't always know about microbes, but we knew there could be issues with it being around us and make us sick. And then there's moral violations. Our brains know to be a successful member of a tribe, you can't just eat the tribe, otherwise eventually the tribe disappears or you get eaten. Cannibalism will actually hit all 4 of these points to a degree, and that absolutely horrifies the human brain. So it's not just a moral question, but a question of putting your own meat suit at risk. So then, how does it exist? Well, cannibalism amongst tribes has existed for quite some time, and even up to the 1900s, it still probably exists somewhere else as well. But the Kuru tribe, for instance, would eat their dead, which then created a self-replicating issue for them, known as the laughing disease, which is a form of prion infection. Essentially, prions are proteins that are then misfolded. In the infection variant, prions exist naturally already in your brain. It's not an issue, but if they get misfolded, that's when it's the issue. So when consuming the brains of those that passed, they too were then infected, and then others would subsequently be infected when they themselves would start laughing, and in turn they would drop and then be eaten, continually propagating this cycle. Prions are absolutely horrifying, one of the scariest diseases I could think of, but even with all that, how exactly does it still exist then? Well, in particular cases involving survival, not just craving for long pig, the hypothalamus has to get into play, which is going to actually allow for it. If you get hungry enough, and I'm not just talking about like, oh no, my glucose is low because I haven't eaten in 8 hours, guess I'll eat this guy's leg. I'm talking about my body is out of fat reserves. My body's been eating its own muscle at this point. I haven't eaten enough calories in like 3 weeks. I'm starving to death. Your body knows that it's running out of options, and so does your brain, which is where things will begin to change concerning your views on food. The best example we have is actually from like the Donner Party back in the day, which then subsequently it's now named Donner Pass. They got stuck there and had to eat one another in order to survive. These were regular people pushed past starvation into cannibalism as a result. Actually, interestingly enough, many Native Americans also have stories about people who turn to cannibalism in the mountains, which then they become Wendigos, if I remember correctly. But basically, the mountains appear to drive people to cannibalism because they get stuck and then have to make difficult decisions. Also, I think there was a plane crash in the mountains, and the people who survived ended up eating the passengers that had already succumbed in the plane crash. Wasn't it like a sports team or something? Maybe like Olympics? I can't remember specifically. I'd have to look into. But with starvation, the hypothalamus will actually override the disgust circuit, which it can do quite regularly, which in turn allows for a person to survive on human flesh. Now, it's not all rainbows and butterflies after the fact for the individual, because the disgust continues to run incredibly deep in humanity. It is known in those that have done this for survival, at least in the past, they would then isolate and face extreme social prejudice, and this would be an incredibly traumatic event for them. And again, this was the past, so there's no way in which you could just debrief a therapist about it. So it would just continue to affect the person until they dropped later in life, sometimes sooner rather than later, probably self-inflicted, or they would take up drinking. It would basically alter the entire course of their life. So even just eating a person once could alter their moral positioning permanently and their empathetic circuits, which would be forever affected. And this is likely why the idea of the Wendigo would pop up, because in those who engaged in this behavior, they would be permanently affected even if they came back to the tribe and tried to continue living as normal. There is a real biological implication once you take a leap at survival as desperate as this. It's a foundational aspect of our species that must be foregone in order to survive, which has lasting impact on the individual. To the cannibals in Bone Tomahawk then. Well, what was going on with them? Well, it's clear first and foremost, no love was lost between the Native American that they brought in to tell them about where they were and these guys in the hills. Likely, this group was a thorn in the side of this other Native American tribe for quite some time. I have no idea how large the other tribe was that had to deal with them in the past, but it seems like the sort of individuals you wouldn't want around anymore if you could help it. Regardless, what allowed for this tribe to behave the way that they did is probably sustained issues along with inbreeding. At some point, it is highly likely that the tribe was larger, but also something would happen that would push them into the realm of cannibalism. They likely had maybe a bad winter, or bad couple of winters, or lack of ability to hunt, or maybe they just didn't have the same warnings to kind of say, hey, don't eat people. But at any rate, it doesn't really matter because it would just be kind of intrinsic. But once that band-aid was ripped, they began to see other humans less as humans, but more as energy and food sources, eating their own mothers. From here, they would likely go around in the night and begin abducting other tribesmen and then eating them. What's interesting is, typically, women would be stolen in an effort to actually add genetic variety into tribes. This is a well-known thing with humanity in general. The Vikings did it. I'm pretty sure the Native Americans did it. Other cultures have done it all the time. You take out the men and then you keep the women. However, this tribe does not appear to actually engage in this behavior, which means they are incredibly inbred. I mean, Samantha was there for days, and it appears their only plan with her, given that she was giving her bird comment about they're trying to make us more lean, it seems to imply that they prefer family members as reproductive partners rather than outside sources. Otherwise, I'm thinking probably within the first 4 minutes, Samantha getting there, she would be armless, legless, eyeless, and she'd just be sitting there. But this isn't all that far-fetched concerning this predilection towards family members. Look at the royal families of Europe. They would interbreed quite often to keep the bloodlines pure, as they would call it. But the problem with this entire concept is it actually poisons the bloodline. We got some of the purest bloodlines imaginable down here in Alabama, and funnily enough, there is a built-in mechanism in all animals that is actually supposed to inspire disgust with inbreeding. Inbreeding itself allows for recessive genes that would usually be overridden to propagate within that population, and given roughly 80% of genes are expressed neurologically, a lot of your DNA is supposed to be for your brain, this can have far-reaching impacts towards behavior. The brain is rather important, as we have all discussed, when it comes to cannibalism. If you are inbred, as all get out, there are a myriad of consequences. Things like reduced intellect, higher rates of schizophrenia, impulse issues, hearing and sight impairment, seizure issues also make the scene more frequently, and essentially inbreeding causes disorders that would usually be overridden by a dominant, more functional gene that you get from hooking up with a partner that doesn't have the same genes as you. But when you hook up with someone who's related, these issues that are likely in them as well could allow for these genes to kind of continue because they are really the only game in town, and this leads them to be expressed in the individual. To prevent this, while pheromones are mostly crap in humans, there is a scent actually that your body prefers. We are finding kind of more so that the way someone smells, not pheromones themselves, appears to impact potential mate selection within humans. In other animals, pheromones are more of a base to kind of build for that mate selection because you can kind of get a lot of information based on that. But our olfactory bulbs are not that large in humans because it's not how we hunt, it's not how we gather information, but that doesn't mean it's completely vestigial. And this is why sometimes when you smell someone, and not just their BO, but their actual scent, it may make you more or less attracted to them. If their scent is different from yours, the likelihood of you being attracted is much higher. If it's too similar, then your brain flags it as too closely genetically related, I guess, speaking to that, to kind of reproduce with. Now, this does not mean your brain will instantly flag someone who's similar to you physically as not reproducible with, but it means that if they really smell like you, like siblings or close cousins, your brain will typically recognize it. However, from what is clearly shown all throughout human history, this can be overridden if there is something wrong with the brain, or maybe for social reasons, or possibly they just didn't know and visually they were attracted, which means F's in the chat there. But with this tribe in particular, it appears to track more with the issue in the brain and the social aspects. After God knows how long and how many generations have passed that they've been inbreeding, this would severely affect the brain. It's not so much that they were evil or anything, it's more like the hills have eyes sort of issue. They are so inbred and affected that socially, they do not have the same social guidances that we have. I personally wouldn't call a person evil for eating a steak. Some might, but I wouldn't. Same concept exists here. Within their small group, they don't personally call each other evil for eating humans. Although I would, and that evil should be met with full annihilation of the practice. But with their brains severely affected, this allows for that practice to continue, and with the disruption of key areas of the brain due to that inbreeding, what they are doing may not be conceptually grasped by them as wrong in the first place. But ultimately, these are just regular people except for they are severely inbred. As a result of their brains likely having malformed areas in which they may be flat out non-functional or decreased or depressed in functionality due to the inbreeding generation after generation, this is clearly going to have impacts on them. I know it's not some cool monstrous reasoning, but genes that are typically recessive allowed to flourish coupled with the trauma of consuming humans kind of creates a not super happy fun time situation for anyone involved. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. This one isn't too crazy of a video. Basically, it's just people eating people, which is a crazy statement to make. I think it was requested so much because of how insane the prospect of just a cannibal tribe in the hills is, but whatever. If you did enjoy, then please leave a like or comment to help get the video out there. Otherwise, you're a huge nerd as per usual. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Instagram, Roanoke Tales link, and Patreon in the description if you'd like to support the channel. And speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. At the Astronaut tier, we have Kusith and Lipsy Genji. Thank you guys for your awesome support. At the Astrophysicist tier, we have Death Dancer, Mayura, and Webitron Supreme. Thank you guys as well. At the Scientist tier, we have Frank Shaftcrank, Some Big Nerd, Metric System, Invictus Echo, Official Texan, The Homeless Guy on the Street, Jason, and Gina Elaine. Thank you guys as well. And the rest of my patrons, I really do appreciate y'all's support. You're absolute ballers. And the thing is, you don't have to do it, so Thank you. But all right, that's gonna do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.